Hello, this time on Sitrep, Britain's biggest warship is on the other side of the world and also roughly halfway to coming home again. Tasks ahead for HMS Prince of Wales include being a floating conference centre off Japan. We will assess what this deployment does for our forces and what it might still have in store. Also on Sitrep is the Royal Navy's vital support, the Royal Fleet Auxilliary, in crisis. One of its ships has been declared so unsafe she can't even move berth. And how lasers, radio beams and even ray guns have gone from being weapons purely of science fiction to potentially transformational technologies for our armed forces.
Sitrep with James Hurst and Professor Michael Clark.
It is just over 100 days since HMS Prince of Wales and her carrier strike group set sail from Portsmouth on Britain's biggest naval deployment so far this century. In that time, they have conducted exercises in the Mediterranean and Arabian Sea. There have been visits to Indonesia and Singapore, search and rescue training, helicopter roping drills, and they've joined 18 other nations for Australia's largest military exercise, Talisman Sabre. That is naming just a few of the events on the way. But outside of specialist defence media, all you might have heard about this deployment is that one of the F-35 jets had to take an extended break on the tarmac in India. Mike, I guess it's good that there's been relatively little drama to get this deployment into mainstream British news, but it might equally leave people wondering, when there is so much going on in the world, what is the point?
Well, in a way, James, that is the point, because there's so much going on in the world, because, we know we're living in a world in transition. We know, those of us in the Western world, that the United States seems like a very unreliable ally, and we need to look to each other much more without ignoring the United States. But the US has gone, as they say, from being the indispensable ally to the insufferable ally. And so the rest of us, Britain and South Korea and Britain and Japan and Britain and Australia and New Zealand, we need to actually pull together much more on the specifics of cooperation. And although, this is often described as a sort of floating cocktail party, which in one respect it is also, that's only the top level, that's the diplomatic bit. But below that, the military is working hard with each other to get used to each other, to work out how they interact. And you can only do that by actually doing it. It's expensive, it takes time. But believe me, all of the effort that's put into this Operation HIMARS deployment will pay off, or is likely to pay off, in the next 5 to 8 years, shall we say, afterwards. If you don't do this sort of thing, it's too late to work it out when you actually need it.
Well, this is pretty much the halfway point of the deployment, and we thought it was worth looking not just at what's happened already, but also what's still ahead, and talking more about those things that Mike mentions, why it all matters. And to help us make sense of it all, we welcome back Tom Sharpe, former Royal Navy commander. Hello, good to have you with us again, Tom.
Hi.
But before we look forward, can I just get your thoughts on the deployment so far? I mean, Mike sort of set out the big picture reasoning. When you think about the granular detail that I mentioned, how valuable do you think this is going to have been to the 4,000 British servicemen and women who are on Op High Mast?
It's really hard to overstate how valuable this kind of operation is. And it is an operation. You can exercise to your heart's content off the west coast of Scotland or the southwest approaches, but there's no substitute for getting out there on operations. Now, people get slightly confused sometimes as to what that means, particularly in naval terms, and they default straight to high-end warfighting. And I think it's a really important point to note in the context of the floating cocktail party accusation, which is a valid one, that is part of the continuum. I mean, we would call it soft power or diplomacy or whatever, but that is part of the naval continuum. And it's the one that navies exist in for 98% of the time, to set the conditions to avoid the 2% where there are missiles in the air and torpedoes in the water. So it's not invalid to do this at all. And the amount of effects they would have had in the various countries they've been to shouldn't be overestimated. It will be very, very significant. I wish the Navy would push it a bit more. I wish we would publicize, some of the effect. And Talisman Sabre was huge. And from a purely technical perspective, getting that number of ships and jets in the air at the same time is very, very complex. Hollywood gives you an impression where these ships meet up and they can just talk to each other on secure comms. It's not that simple. There's an awful lot of integration required, and they're doing it day in, day out to great effect.
I mean, just give us some examples down at the level of an individual serviceman or woman. If they've not deployed on an op like this before, what kind of skills are they getting that they might need in a hot situation in the future?
Yeah, I mean, look, at warfare's like any other discipline, really. A lot of it's about relationships. It's about knowing the capabilities of the people you're working with, just as well as you know the capabilities of the people you might be fighting against. And so at a very low level, from operations room to operations room, there will be integration work going on every day, dialing up on various different systems, whether that's a chat-based classified system or an old-fashioned HF radio, all these different things. The link, which is the way that the tactical picture is arranged between the task force. If you get that wrong, if you don't build an accurate link picture that's fed by all your different agencies and satellite intelligence, in other words, you don't know what's around you, you will lose, whatever situation you end up in, you will lose that battle. So that has to be watertight, and it's really difficult and it's really complex. Different ships, different countries, all coming at this with slightly different equipment. So the ships day in, day out will be just exercising that and working on that and making it better and better and better, so that if we have to do it again at the rush in 2 years' time, it will be much, much faster. But my final point, what will people be learning from this trip? It's fun. And I don't think we should overlook that, particularly in an environment where we are struggling to retain people. And without people, we have none of this. These trips are fun, and providing they're allowed into different countries. CSG 21 was a real problem for that because of COVID. And it wasn't fun. In fact, it was retention negative. So the team have to work at that as well and make sure that people get the time off where it's appropriate.
So if we look where CSG 25 is now, they've just done a passing exercise with 4 of Indonesia's warships. Again, I guess that comms thing that you were talking about, Tom, and integrating that and practicing that. They're now in a stretch of the Pacific between Indonesia and Japan, but they've been joined by US Marine Corps air assets. So US Marine Corps F-35s are on board, and also Osprey helicopters. Again, Tom, this is about the integration and operating together.
Yeah, absolutely right. And if this all comes together on the flight deck, which is, these things are a sight to behold when they're at full speed. And I've been on the deck of US carriers as they're launching wave after wave of F-18s. It's a sort of dance that the choreography of which is finely tuned to perfection. You start putting an Osprey on deck, everybody knows about it. That is a beast, and you need to be very, very certain about how you're doing that in order to do it safely. So again, practice makes perfect. The old cliche, the training kicked in, is a cliche for a reason. Because
the Osprey, just to jump in, am I right in thinking that's this helicopter that can tilt its rotors and almost fly like a plane, or put them back up and fly like a helicopter? Because I imagine that's quite different to work around.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's huge. I mean, it's 22 tons or something like that. It might even be more than that. And it has this extremely complex tilt rotor system, so it can take off vertically and then transition into forward flight. And it's that transition, the gearbox, that has given it a slight sort of reliability issues over the years. It's a complex beast. But if you want to extract large numbers of people from, well, pretty much anywhere, in a non-combatant evacuation operation, for example, the Osprey is pretty much the sort of first player on the team sheet. We just can't afford them. They are beasts. They're very, very expensive. They're not particularly reliable. So we use the US one. So having them flying from our ship and knowing how to do that, again, is just part of its ongoing integration training.
Mike, it's interesting to see these US planes and helicopters on board, because you were talking at the start about the US being seen as a difficult partner right now. It was very much noted when this carrier strike group deployment was announced that the US wasn't playing a key role, whereas it was, a huge part of number one. What do you make of the fact that there are now American planes and helicopters on board?
Yeah, I mean, it's levels of engagement, really. I mean, when we started Operation HIMARS, I mean, Eldridge Colby in the Pentagon said, you shouldn't be doing this. We don't care. We don't want you in the Pacific. You should be worrying about the Atlantic. And that was a typically, I think, short-sighted view that you're getting from the very top. And other members of the administration said, this is just Britain being vainglorious. You don't belong in the Indo-Pacific. We belong in the Indo-Pacific. We don't want our allies there. That's a stupid thing to say. However, below that level, the militaries always get on with it. And to be honest, when the political atmosphere is bad, and within, the Transatlantic Alliance, it's bad every few years, some of them very vehement. I mean, these are the most vehement we've ever had. But when you have these political rows, the fact that the military just get on with it, that they know each other, they like each other, they click together. And until they're told not to do it, they'll carry on with the sort of sensible, pragmatic cooperation that is to their advantage. And that's what we're seeing here. So regardless of what the White House thinks or the Pentagon thinks under present management, the US Marine Corps, the US Air Force, the US Army, they welcome the fact that their allies, I mean, the Anzacs and the Brits and the Japanese and the South Koreans now are prepared to get out and exercise together because everybody benefits from it. And so it's in a way that it's always a comfort when political relations are bad at the top level, that military relations normally are pretty stable.
Can I jump a point to that just very quickly? There are two examples here which I think perhaps really clarify this in my mind. One was going through the Red Sea. That was the first drama of the trip. The Red Sea was in a sort of partial ceasefire at that point, so theoretically risk levels are a little bit lower. But the US sent 2 destroyers through Suez Canal with us. And then by the time we got to the Bab el-Mandeb at the bottom of the Red Sea, the southern Red Sea, we had perhaps the most complete defensive screen around our heavies, our high-value units I've seen for a long time. The Americans could not wait to help us. And that was whilst all this nonsense with Eldridge Colby was going on. As Mike says, at the military level, that's where the special relationship resides. And then the second point, which is why actually quite a lot of officials were annoyed with what he was saying, was that there were really high-level conversations going on about what to do with Iran. And we agreed that we would send the carrier onto the Indo-Pacific, and that gave the flexibility for them to release the Nimitz from PACOM, the Pacific Command, to the Red Sea. And you then had the Vinson and the Nimitz sort of off Iran doing what they do best. Now, isn't that a great conversation? Put the two really well-armed, nuclear carrier strike groups to face off Iran and backfill, because PACOM are constantly looking at the Red Sea and going, this is not the fight.
Tom, can I ask you a question just while we're talking about that? When the task group, when HIMARS went through the Suez Canal and the Red Sea, the tide spring, the oiler, the RFA oiler that was with it, didn't go that route. The oiler went round, my understanding is, the Cape of Good Hope, went the long way round and met them in the Arabian Sea. Do you know why that was?
I think it was just pragmatic. I mean, there will be a little bit of a risk assessment here. You don't need the tanker there. There were allied tankers there. So again, part of this, I think task groups don't stick together. In fact, I think we're about to see them split again to South Korea. So send it around, do some engagement off West Africa. There's tons of work to be done there, and it's part of the world that we sort of, our Navy tends to neglect because it's not on the way to anywhere that we tend to go to. So why not send one of your ships round the long way? If that reduces the risk in the Red Sea a little bit, then great. So to me, that was a perfectly sensible diversion. If you're really bloody minded, you can say they were running away from the threat. But I don't see it that way. I think it was pretty pragmatic.
But it's interesting, the narrative you paint there suggests actually, although people talked about at the time the carrier strike group moving away from where the hottest operation in the world was happening in terms of Iran, actually it contributed to that by being able to backfill for the US.
That's right. I mean, I vary on this one at sort of 51-49, depending on who I've spoken to last, as to what it should have done. It is a carrier strike group, and when I'm inevitably losing the battle in the pages of various newspapers as to what its value is. The fact that it wasn't conducting strike operations when it had the opportunity to causes a lot of people some angst. And me. I mean, I would have sent it there in January 2024 when this was really ramping up. I would have sent Queen Elizabeth down there. The Truman was there, the umbrella to backfill their known shortcomings, and there are quite a few, was in place. So I would have sent it down there to conduct strike ops. In this occasion, as it went through, that we were in that ceasefire, it was all picking up at a tremendous rate ashore in Iran. I think, on balance, it was the right decision. But again, as I said, indicative of the very high level conversations going on about how to share resources that frankly make the sort of Colby statement look daft.
Okay, so if we look at what's next, both of you have mentioned South Korea. We know that some British F-35s have flown there to join exercises. Tom, you think the carrier strike group in terms of ships could also send some to South Korea?
Yes, I think so. I think that's the plan. Inevitably, when I ask this question, I get told to go away. But I think that's the plan as far as I can tell.
It's interesting, because that's what I was reading yesterday, was some suggestions that ships as well are going to South Korea, but I couldn't get it confirmed. What we do know is HMS Prince of Wales is definitely going to Japan, and there, big government press release talking about it hosting a Defence and Security Industry Day and the Pacific Future Forum, which is this major international defence, security, technology and trading event. This is the UK military, biggest warship. And Mike, it is being used as a floating conference centre, as you talk about at the start, the cocktail party circuit. It's a difficult look to some people.
Well, it may be, but they ought to investigate, what you can get out of it. I mean, remember that about 20% of our trade, Britain's trade, is with the Indo-Pacific. So it matters that we look as if we use our own products. And one of the things about the arms trade is that nobody's terribly interested in your weapon systems if your own forces don't use them. And so as an advertisement for British shipbuilding and British technology, British aerospace, all the stuff we do in aerospace, remember the F-35 is 15% produced by Britain. We're a tier one partner. So every F-35 that's sold in the world is partly to our benefit. So all of those things, all of those arguments are there to be made. And the tangible presence of a big ship, and nothing much bigger than a carrier, and this is a very impressive carrier because it's one of the newest in the world. I don't think it's not technically the biggest, but it's probably the best in the world at the moment. That actually has an effect. And so it's not just a trade effect. It's, as we said, it's a soft power defence diplomacy effect, and it has to go right. I mean, you have to be able to prove that whatever headlines people are picking up about what's happening on the domestic front in Britain, that when Britain comes to visit you, it looks good, it works, everybody knows exactly what they're doing. That's an important image to project.
Tom, how does that job go down for the men and women serving on board?
Yeah, look, it's part of the job. They get it. If it means they can get ashore, then that's great. I mean, I don't want to keep going on about that, but this is an important part of the morale component.
See the world.
I think, well, right, join the Navy, see the world, but I think another thing that's often overlooked in this cocktail party accusation is all these countries, Japan, or they all have embassies that are there all the time, very expensive, lots of staff, lots of people, lots of serving military. And they can only do one job, right? And it's the business of diplomacy. The carrier is effectively, in this case, in Japan, plugging in as if it were a mobile embassy. And yet it carries all that flexibility. So it's very peculiar when people sort of beat their chests over this as a task. No one ever says that about the embassy in Japan. No one ever says this is a colonial hangover, this is a waste of money. And yet they say it about the ship. So, which just to me makes no sense. This is a very valid role for the ship and they'll be very good at it.
Okay, so after Japan, are there any stops planned that you know of after Japan, or is it just coming home? And then the big question is, what route is it going to take home? We're seeing more Chinese military drills around Taiwan, for example, at the moment. So what is next, Tom?
Well, I don't know, and neither should I. Of course, the minute you start projecting forward with any accuracy, you're giving away intelligence and targeting information. The freedom of navigation in the South China Sea is an interesting one. Certainly, we send HMS. I forget which one actually. Maybe Tamar. Maybe
Spey, Tom. Is it HMS Spey? I think through the Taiwan Strait.
Exactly right.
I checked that out. Yeah, it was a Spey. Only an OPV, mind you, and only an offshore patrol vessel. Not exactly a big frigate, but never mind.
But I quite like that because you're still reaffirming your sort of freedom of navigation. You're doing it in a very de-escalatory way, and in my view, perhaps doing it so that the carrier strike group doesn't need to. You've done it now. You've got the rage out of the Chinese media saying this is provocative, and now your destroyer or frigate that would normally do it perhaps doesn't have to. Let's see. I don't know. And then, as you say, yes, at some point they've got to confront the Red Sea conundrum. Very much depends on what's going on there at the time. It's a weekly changing situation, and they'll call it as they see it.
Okay, well, let's broaden out. When we look at one absolutely essential part of the carrier strike group, you've already mentioned it, RFA Tidespring, which is carrying stores and fuel to replenish all the other vessels. Now, the Royal Fleet Auxilliary has just celebrated its 120th birthday, and it remains the essential logistic support required by the Royal Navy to keep it operating around the world. But right now it's facing big questions about the size and state of its fleet. One ship has just been handed over to the Royal Navy to become a warship, and another is stranded, unable to even move berth in Portsmouth. RFA Argus has lost her safety certificate. This is a vessel whose job should include acting as a 100-bed hospital ship and also supporting Royal Marines operations, a role taken on after the withdrawal of the RFA's two amphibious landing craft. Now, our colleagues at BFBS Forces News understand that out of 10 ships that the RFA has, only 2 are currently operational. Tom, can you just give us any clarity on the story with HMS Argus? Because she was supposed to have had her service extended beyond 2030. That was the plan.
Yeah, it's a very sorry saga, the Argus one. I mean, she's a great ship. We took her up from trade in 1980. She deployed almost immediately down to the Falklands, and has been in pretty much every sort of hot zone ever since. She's like the Swiss Army knife of ships. Bought for one role, converted again, and has become sort of all things to all people, but is also 45 years old. One of the criteria to be labelled a dark fleet ship is to be over 20 years. So in the commercial world, 20 years is considered old. She's 45 years old, so was properly being taped together by the end in a way that only the Navy and the Royal Fleet Auxiliary can do. It's our greatest strength, but it's also our greatest weakness. If you're in wartime, taping your ship together to make it carry on in the fight is a good thing. If you're doing it in peacetime, it's a bad thing. So it's a conundrum. And she essentially failed on an awful lot of inspections, and eventually Lloyd's, who I think their patience with the RFA is wearing thin anyway. There's a sense with the RFA and the Navy, of course, don't fall under these inspections at all. So it's a different regime. But the RFA do, because they're commercial vessels. And I think Lloyd's were starting to get a bit fed up. And then they went on board and just found such a vast array of defects and issues and problems. They eventually went, right, we've had enough. The question for me is how, this was 10 years in the build, how did no one intervene? Because we must at some point have become perilously close to having an accident. And just to finish this off, I've recommended that they now treat Argus as if she had had a fatality. It's a bit of a mawkish thing to say, but it's only then that we investigate these things properly, because we invite in external agencies and without fear or favour. If the Navy's left to do it, it'll all be a bit soft and a bit sort of just trying to hide the embarrassment. I think in the case of Argus, we need to embrace the embarrassment, really get stuck in as if someone had died, because those lessons will be applicable to the rest of the RFA, to the rest of the Navy, and probably to the rest of the defence. So we should use it as an opportunity. in my view.
I mean, the bigger picture here, Mike, is, what we've set out in terms of ships being retired, Argus being forced out of service, another ship being handed over. This is a service that has shrunk, but I guess people go, well, okay, 2 out of 10 are currently available. How many do we actually need to be sailing to be keeping the Navy doing its job right now, Mike?
Well, a lot more than 2 out of 10 if we think the Navy is going to be as busy as we suspect it will be in the next few years. And again, it's the old problem that we've talked about endlessly on this programme in other weeks, that everything we have militarily is in the shop window. So there we are, Operation High Mast, the Carrier Strike Group, is a sparkling example of what we've got in the shop window. And behind the shop window, we've got next to nothing. Next to nothing. And so here we are with maybe 3 RFA ships available, the Proteus, the Tide Spring, which is with Operation High Mast now, and the Tide Surge. And I was checking out, so, the Tide Race is not available because of lack of crew. The Cardigan Bay and the Fort Victoria are laid up, apparently because of lack of crew. The Stirling Castle has been transferred, as you said, to the Navy so they can crew it. And the Lyme Bay and the Mounts Bay are in dry dock for maintenance, and the Argus is a crisis. I mean, that's a pathetic roll call of various sorts of failure. So one sort of failure is maintenance, and the other sort of failure is crewing, because the RFA income, RFA pay, has fallen about 30% below the pay for commercial seafarers over the last 15 years. And so they can't attract people. So they've got to address that. And it's been building for a long time, this crisis. As Tom said, and he's written about it very forcefully. Unless we address it now, it'll just get worse until we don't have an RFA force at all.
The old saying, amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics. I mean, it's essentially, Tom, that is the RFA's role is logistics support, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, logistics is the difference between a click and a bang, as every logistician will tell you at the start of every presentation. But it's true. Without the RFA, we're a coastal raiding force. It's the RFA that makes us a deep water navy, a global navy, which we are, and we aspire to continue to be so. Without the RFA, we lose that capability, because the whole point of a strike group or a task group or any deployed operations is to be able to do so in a time and place of your choosing, with or without host nation support.
Yeah. And remember, James, that the Argus was due to be joining Operation High Mast in the second part of the deployment. It was due to come onto the whole High Mast operation later on, to replace, I assume, the Tide Spring or some of what the Tide Spring was doing. And
I think it was actually meant to add to the Tide Spring. What I was reading was that Tide Spring is going to do the whole thing, but you
and Argus was going to join. Yeah, well, that certainly won't be happening now.
No, and Fort Victoria, of course, perhaps as big a scandal, a single point of failure when it comes to fleet solid support ships that we've allowed to fail. So we've had to borrow the Norwegians. Now, allies are great if you choose to do it. If you have to do it, it's not great.
I mean, the trouble is, at a time when we talk many times about the need for the Royal Navy to have more warships, or perceived need, depending on your point of view, this kind of becomes whack-a-mole. And of course, it can seem easy to kind of go, well, look, we can save there, that those are not fighting ships, and we need fighting ships.
I think there's an element of that. I mean, there's a part of this is that there's no real love between the Royal Navy and the Royal Fleet Auxiliary. They've always just been someone that's there. They're fantastic to work with at sea. I mean, I must have taken thousands and thousands of tons of fuel off them over the years. It's always first-rate fuel. You know that the plugging into them, the mechanics of that are going to work flawlessly, far better than any other nation's tankers. They're absolutely first class. But that was it. They're just there, sort of. So the Navy didn't really love them.
Does it need a cultural shift, you think?
Yeah, right. I mean, I think we're past crisis now. I think drastic action is needed to recover this. And I don't know what that looks like, but it has to look like much more of a merger between the two services. That will initiate a little bit of an exodus initially, because there's a lot of proud RFA types who will say, I didn't join the Royal Navy, I joined the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, and leave. But I think that has to then settle down, and we need to work out a hybrid option to crew all these vessels because, at the moment, we really can't. And I think when we get back off high mast, it's going to be even worse. That to me, the shop window analogy that Mike used is going to look even worse when the shop window is, when the shutters are down because they've come back.
I remember talking to some RFA mariners just after the Falklands, and they were really proud to be part of it. They were really proud of what they did in the Falklands, and that doesn't arise very often.
I mean, for a long time, you could recognize the RFA officers in mess dinners because they had many, many medals, because their ships would go from hotspot to hotspot, campaign to campaign, providing those services. So they are integral. They have been in every fight we've ever been in. We've let them get into a really poor state. And I think someone should be held accountable. I think names should be named in sort of Haddon Cave style. I think we need a shock. The system needs a shock. I mean, it also needs money. That's a whole different subject and partly the reason we are where we are. But I think we need to be brutally honest now, and that's going to come with an embarrassment that we have to then ride out.
Tom, really good to get your thoughts today. Tom Sharpe, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, on that theme of strategy, tactics, and everything else being nothing without logistics, we have talked many times about Ukraine running short of ammunition and how quickly it could happen to us too in a war. So, imagine a weapon which could be fired an indefinite number of times without ever needing any supplies, and at a cost of pounds per shot rather than millions of pounds per shot. Directed energy weapons, these have been a sci-fi concept for years. Ray guns, lasers, that kind of thing. Now, albeit much bigger, they are on the cusp of becoming military reality. Dr. Matthew Powell, who teaches strategic and air power studies at Portsmouth University and the RAF College Cranwell, has been telling me how directed energy weapons could start to transform warfare very soon, starting with something called Dragonfire that has been successfully tested by the Royal Navy and is due to be fitted to Royal Navy destroyers from 2027.
It's a laser weapon, it's a direct energy weapon, but most importantly, it's a line of sight weapon. So it's something that you can observe what's happening and you can fire directly at it. But the way it's designed to work is not to cause necessarily the destruction that we would see with kinetic weapons, but it's designed to essentially cut things like drones, incoming missiles onto vessels in half, and to just destroy them in that sense. So it's actually probably happening a lot further out than we would see with general and current kinetic weapons. The other thing I think that's really, really interesting about the Dragonfire is its cost. We see the cost of major weapon systems today, even the missiles are looking at 6, 7 figures per missile. This is £10 a shot.
Yeah,
so that
makes a big difference.
Absolutely. It makes a huge difference because you can use it again and again and again. Now, the one thing we don't know about Dragonfire yet, and we'll have to see, is how reliable it is as a system. How often does it need to go in for maintenance? How often does it need to be repaired? How often does it fail on operations? We've seen it tested successfully, but testing successfully is not the same as using it in an active op.
And is its role effectively air defence? Is its targets simply missiles and drones?
Yeah, essentially, it's being used by the Royal Navy. It's being used to enhance their air defence capabilities, to provide a cheaper, more cost-effective version of it. But what we're also seeing now is the use of other systems for the army. A radio frequency directed energy weapon, which is more wide-ranging. This is, again, in test at the moment, and it's hoped that it's going to be rolled out for around 2027 as well. But this is using high-energy radio waves to actually disrupt and damage critical electronic components. So we're almost sending out a pulse of a radio wave. And again, we're not having to physically destroy the enemy asset. We can just switch it off completely.
Frying the circuits, effectively.
Yeah, essentially. If it's successful, you can use it against uncrewed aerial systems, uncrewed surface vessels, aircraft, vehicles, pretty much anything with an electronic circuit. So we're perhaps seeing already a counter to the drone swarm. and the use of drones in Ukraine. And perhaps we're seeing the continuation that we see in every conflict and that we see in all military technology, that when something new emerges, counters are found to it. And again, we talked about Dragonfire, it being £10 per shot. This could be as cheap as 10p per shot.
What kind of range are we talking about? Let's specifically Dragonfire. What kind of range does it have?
The honest answer to that is the MOD haven't told us. That they've kept that secret, I think rightly so as well, for operational purposes. You don't.
Do we have any idea of the scale? At least the scale we're talking about. Is it hundreds of miles or tens of miles?
We're looking within a couple of miles. So tests have been done. They've done trials against drones and the metal that is used on the hulls of ships, and they've been able to target them successfully from around about 2 miles is the maximum. But what we're seeing here is a real uptick in precision. And again, the claim is made that Dragonfire is able to hit a £1 coin from a kilometre away. So exceptionally precise. I think what we need to temper this, though, is that Dragonfire is exceptionally good as it looks, and the trials are claiming that it's very, very good. Again, as I said, it's got to be used in operations before we see its full capability. But it is only really useful against missiles, mortars, drones. Anything smaller, anything larger, it's going to struggle. But it's also going to struggle in fog and in rain as well.
Yes, or even, I mean, cloud. If there's cloud between you and a missile.
It's line of sight. So if you cannot see the target, you cannot engage it with this. So there are limitations to the system, whereas perhaps the weapon system that the army is developing, that radio frequency directed energy weapon, as long as you have a radar picture, perhaps, that can see through the clouds and see what's there, perhaps you can use that a little bit more widely, a little bit more in bad weather. So really what we're looking at here are changes to how we might go about defending infantry positions, naval positions, even perhaps air bases. Again, could we scale this technology to increase its range? Again, that will require the testing, the trials. Could we scale it down? That it could be carried by infantry on their backs, in their hands, on their kits, and use it for personal protection.
The question of how transformative this could be is, I guess, whether it could replace entirely interceptor missiles.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's the way we have to look at it. And I'm not sure that it is a complete replacement of interceptor missiles. I think it's an addition to, and I think it's something that can be used in specific circumstances, in specific ways, against what we're seeing as more of the threat of today and tomorrow in terms of drones. But we will still have more conventional threats that we will need to defend against. These are limited systems, and there's only so far that you can go in scaling them up in size before they become too big to fit on something like the Type 45 destroyer.
And you've talked about sea deployment and land deployment. Air deployment's going to be much harder, isn't it? Because it's potentially a big piece of kit, but also the power source required.
Yeah, we could fit them onto aircraft. I think we could. Again, scaling down that technology is going to be the problem. I think that's going to take a lot of investment, a lot of research and development. And then I think you're right. How do you power this? And how long does that power source last? Are we talking that it allows a fast jet fighter to stay in the air for as long as its range and its fuel capacity will allow it? Or are we talking Battle of Britain figures where you've got 10 seconds worth of ammunition, and after that, that's it, you've got to go back and you've got to rearm regardless of your fuel position?
I mean, we've largely talked about this technology as defensive. Is it also being looked at as an offensive weapon on the battlefield against, say tanks or maybe robots?
Yeah, I think that we look at this as a defensive system at the moment, but certainly its utilization could be in an offensive manner. But again, it will require modification. It will require change, I think, to achieve that. I think you're more likely to see this with that the army system, the radio frequency, rather than the laser that you have with Dragonfire. just because of its capability. If you're engaged in an armoured conflict and you could send this pulse out and destroy a third of your opponent's tanks, why wouldn't you?
And of course, we're talking, or at least in my head, we're talking about how we might use it. Other people might use it against us. What are the defences to this that are being developed?
At the moment, I think we're looking at this in a way that we did with drones perhaps 10, 15 years ago, that they were unbeatable, that they couldn't be destroyed that efficiently, that effectively, partly because of the context of the operations they were used in, but because we were still working out what they did, how they did it, and how to counter it. So I think we're in the next 10 to 15 years, we'll start to see people find ways to counter these systems, just as we've seen with other electronic warfare measures in the past. It could be that we have radar, sort of stealth-equipped tanks that are invulnerable to these radio pulses. How easy is it to jam? How easy is it to get into the system and to prevent the signals and the responses being sent? Again, we're sort of speculating as to the future, but it'll be interesting to see what occurs and what comes out of this.
Can we just touch on another version of potentially directed energy weapons that reading around, people are also looking at particle beams, which I think in science fiction that would specifically be the ray gun.
Yeah, I think so. It's another one of these technologies that people are looking at, and militaries and governments and private sector companies are investing an awful lot of money into. But the tech is still being developed. And it's one of these that it could be a spectacular success. It could achieve some things, or it could be a huge waste of time and money. And we're not going to know until we reach the point of finding it out.
So people are investigating it. What are they hoping it might be able to do that lasers and radio wave directed energy weapons couldn't?
So one of the big things about particle beams, as opposed to things like the laser focused systems like Dragonfire, is that it can be used in all weathers. We're still working out whether it needs to be line of sight or whether it can be incorporated with radar. So that's something that needs to be worked out and figured out. It's high speed, it's high energy, so potentially its range could be a lot longer than we're seeing with either the Army system or Dragonfire. So again, the range, not just in terms of depth, but in terms of width as well, that you can send this particle beam out. And also its destructive effect. It will kill pretty much anything, from what I understand of the technology. So its use and its engagement will be really, really significant if the technology can be cracked.
This is kind of a new arms race. Where is the UK in that race compared to our allies and our enemies, importantly?
Unfortunately, I think despite having Dragonfire, and I think we're one of the leaders in terms of the laser side of things, I think we just don't have the money to invest in the R&D that's necessary to provide the wide-ranging experimentation and development that's needed for all of these things. So we have to pick and choose what we want. So we will be reliant on alliance partners, particularly the US, that have the money to spend on the R&D that's necessary. But, you know, we are at the forefront of thinking about this and how we might use this, and that's almost as important as having the system itself.
Matthew Powell, really fascinating insights. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Mike, chatting to Dr. Powell, one of the things he's really interested in is the impacts that this could have in terms of global power politics. And it got me thinking back, of course, you know, those of us of an age remember the SDI Star Wars program that President Reagan floated. He wanted to put directed energy weapons in space, potentially to shoot down Russian nuclear missiles. But what that actually did was stoked tensions, didn't it?
Yes, it did, although it did have the perverse effect of convincing the Russians that they couldn't keep up with this. And I remember at the time, I mean, looking at Star Wars, I was in the States at the time when all this came out in the autumn of 1983, and it was the only subject in town, and everyone was talking about Star Wars. And what it was all about, all of the technologies were already known, so there was nothing that had to be invented. The challenge was, could you scale it up tenfold? Could you increase the incidence of whatever it was 1,000-fold? Instead of having one interceptor, 1,000 interceptors? Could you put it into space? Could you power it from space? And could you maintain it in space? And could you produce a computer system that was extremely complex that would be guaranteed to work at 99.9% accuracy the first time it was ever needed? So that was the challenge. It wasn't a scientific challenge. It was a challenge of heroic engineering. Could you engineer what we already had, what the Americans already had, and put it into space at huge levels? And, you know, that is still the challenge of thinking about all of this. If you're thinking about President Trump's current ideas about Star Wars, it's still the issue. He wants
to put it into the Golden Dome that he's talking about.
That's right. It's heroic engineering. There's nothing new about the science of it, actually. The question is, it's the engineering challenge. But the funny thing about the original Star Wars idea is that although it didn't work because the heroic engineering was just far too expensive, it convinced the Russians that they couldn't keep up with this. Now, whether, you know, President Trump's ambitions would have the same effect, I rather doubt. But when we look at lasers, I mean, one of the arguments we used to have in the 1980s, as Matthew was saying there, the laser dwells, in this case, on something the size of a pound coin from a couple of kilometers away. Well, it has to dwell for maybe a second or a fraction of a second on that part to burn through the metal. So supposing that the weapon is being spun as it comes through the air, supposing the weapon is rotated, if that increases what we used to be called the dwell time, it might actually, instead of half a second, it might take 1.5 seconds. Well, therefore, you've made your problem 3 times greater in trying to actually dwell in a line of sight directed energy weapon. With lasers, I mean, like most people, I first came across lasers in the James Bond films. Remember Goldfinger? When I was a boy, we all watched Goldfinger, and that was the first time any of us had ever heard of a laser. And there was this enormous sort of rifle, this enormous machine that was designed to cut a hole, and it took some time through the steel of Fort Knox, the doors of Fort Knox. That was the climax of the film. Goldfinger was breaking into Fort Knox by burning through the steel doors. And yet now, lasers, that was laser beams then. Now lasers are, say, intrinsic to CD players. They're the fundamental essence of what a CD player is. And even CD players are now out of fashion. And, you know, sometimes, James, doing this programme makes me feel very old.
I was about to say, thank you for making me feel old, but yeah, I am. Mike, always good to see you. Thank you. Thanks to all of our guests. Professor Michael Clarke will be reunited with Kate Chabot for another Sitrep next Thursday. Until then, of course, you can stay up to date with all the latest defence news on our website, forcesnews.com. For now, though, from me, James Hurst, thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.